Welcome to another episode of Otherworldly Encounters with Mike and Brian. Brian, we got a weird one today.
We always have a weird one.
We do always have weird ones. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into a cult. We are going to peel some layers back. That's disturbing as it is fascinating.
Okay.
Heaven's Gate. I know. How you feeling about this one?
You know, we talk about a lot of weird stuff on this podcast, and sometimes it's hard to separate the real from the fictitious. And I think this is one of those episodes where we kind of talk about like when people get too heavy-handed in one arena. And I'm not here to say what's right and what's wrong, but we'll just kind of go through what this was and let folks make up their own mind. I think it's a little bit weird when you go to this extreme, but I also understand that, personal beliefs, your religious beliefs, some of those different things push people in different directions. So it's an interesting one today.
It's very interesting. But before we get into it, how was your weekend?
It was solid. I had a wedding this weekend. I had a Friday wedding of all things too.
That's strange.
Friday wedding at 5:30. We had a great time. But a Friday kind of sets up for a slow Saturday, which made for a real easy Sunday because there's no Bengals game. They're Monday night team this week. So,
and you missed the OSU game.
Yeah, well, I watched it, but I just only from my couch.
Yeah. No, I mean, my weekend was pretty good. I was just, what did I do? Friday night, I watched a band. Phoenix Rising Sea Bus or something.
Okay.
Yeah, they're right. And then decided I was going to wake up Saturday morning and play golf at 7:30.
Did you not go to the Buckeyes game then?
No. My two other people used my tickets.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And then played golf at 7:30 in the morning. Got done with that. Came back to the barn. We watched the Buckeye game, and then I was out.
That's all she wrote.
I was out.
Yeah.
It's probably the earliest I've been to bed, and probably since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was in bed probably by 8.
And
then this morning I woke up and my dad and I and a friend drove up to the Browns game.
And boy, that was not great. As a bettor, I put my marbles in the Browns basket this week for the survivor pool, and that was a mistake. We went from 80 down to 8 teams because of the first couple weeks of the NFL were just totally unexpected. And I was like, the Browns are gonna beat the Giants. Like, it's the Giants. They're terrible.
Well, when you texted me and said that you were taking the Browns this week in the survivor pool.
You said it was a risky play. God damn it, you're right.
I told you, man. It's like,
I know.
The Browns, you can't put, no.
You can't put money there.
All right, so what's your weapon of choice today? What are you drinking?
Well, usually I'm sporting band shirts, but this weekend is, at least it's Oktoberfest in Cincinnati. We're here at the end of September. We're coming into peak fall season. We actually had some rain for the first time forever. So I've got my Grand Rapids, Michigan Oktoberfest shirt on today. So in the spirit of Oktoberfest and dark beers, I've got your good old-fashioned Guinness today.
Yeah, and since we hyped up the dark beers last week,
Wow.
I'm going to go with the Samuel Adams Oaked Vanilla Porter.
Yeah.
I do appreciate you giving me a legit bottle opener this time and not some fucking Swiss Army knife thing that you gave me 3 months ago, whatever.
You're welcome. Everybody needs a little adversity in their life.
Yeah.
Not bad.
I don't hate it.
Yeah.
All right, you ready to kick this chicken?
Yeah, so we're talking about cults. What are we talking about?
All right, man. We're going to start off with the leader of Heaven's Gate, Marshall Heifer Applewhite. So he was an energetic leader of Heaven's Gate. He was born in 1931 in Texas, and he was the son of a Presbyterian? Is that how you say that? Yeah, minister. So he grew up in a religious all around him. But his path to becoming a cult leader wasn't really a straight line.
Yeah, no, not at all. Applewhite was a guy who went through a lot of personal crises. He initially wanted to follow in his father's footsteps as a preacher, but instead went into a career of music and teaching. I think at one point he was a choir director. But, things in his life began to take a dark turn and kind of unravel in the late 90s.
Late 90s or late 60s?
Or, sorry, 60s. Yeah. Sorry.
I'll say that was a little late for
Yeah, a little late. No, 60s, not 90s.
Yeah. And I mean, this guy was, he didn't, like, it wasn't like he came out wanting to be a cult leader, to your point, right? I mean, he was married, he had 2 kids, but then his marriage fell apart. And then he also struggled with his, sexual identity, specifically his feelings towards like other men. At the time when being openly gay wasn't highly recognized, it still was stigmatized. He had internal conflict over his sexual identity that led him to deep feelings, of guilt, and he believed he was on a spiritual mission that transcended earthly concerns.
Yeah, he is exactly right. He was a guy that was kind of tormented by his desires, which he felt like kind of contradicted his spiritual purpose. His inner conflict kind of played a massive role in shaping his later teachings in Heaven's Gate, which is what we're talking about. But where sexuality in any form was considered a distraction to spiritual enlightenment, which is kind of odd, because a lot of times today we talk about how, at least personally, when I think of cults, usually there's some kind of sexual innuendo that's engaged in there, and either it's like massive orgies or multiple marriages for one person. It's usually a little bit odd, but that was not the case with this guy. And Applewhite later in the cult's life would even go so far as to castrate himself to eliminate sexual desire, which wasn't a few of the followers followed in practice. But talk about extremism. That's up there.
Yeah. And going back to castration, from some of the stuff I read, like he did it, he did it first, and then like 5 other dudes followed, but like they giggled during it. Like, I don't think I'd be giggling during that procedure.
We're big NFL fans, and like I get some people going out there and getting a tattoo of like the Bengals or Browns or whatever, but to go so far as to castrate yourself for a cause is just beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, I can't comprehend
so
that.
You're talking pretty extremist behavior.
I sure as hell wouldn't do that for the Browns.
I'm not doing it for the Bengals either. 20-year season, take a holder. Sorry, it can't happen.
No. And then he was also institutionalized for a brief time in 1972 after suffering a nervous breakdown, which... Yeah. But this is where it kind of takes a kind of like a turn towards like down that cult path. During that period, he met a nurse, and her name was Bonnie Nettles, who would change his life and steer him down a path toward the cult leadership.
Yeah, and Bonnie was kind of a lesser known but equally important half of the Heaven's Gate leadership. She was born in 1927. She had an interest in astrology and mysticism, which are a couple subjects that we've kind of touched on in our show. But she was deeply spiritual and believed she had a special connection to the divine. And I think that particular piece is kind of something that you and I have touched on a bunch of different times, where I think it's good to have that connection. And obviously we've talked to Gregory, and I think he does a lot of good with it, but there's, for every good side, there's an equally darker side. And I think that's what we're examining kind of today, is that darker side of that piece.
Yeah, because remember, you're talking about don't drive behind the semi with the pipes, and remember you would take
Final Destination shit.
You would take it to the
don't drive behind a truck with logs or pipes, or it's 100% going to come undone and kill you probably. So just avoid it.
If Brian ever asked you to join something, question it.
Probably don't do it.
Yeah, but so Nettles, she claimed to have regular communications with spiritual beings, right? Just to your point, we were just saying. And she was also heavily into New Age beliefs and had a history of dabbling in alternative spiritual practices. Her relationship with Applewhite was unique. Some would say it was more like a spiritual partnership than anything romantic. I would highly doubt it was romantic, especially being he had an aversion to any type of, sexual...
Kind of sexual confusion almost.
Right.
Yeah.
They saw themselves as like two witnesses, mentioned in a book mentioned in the book of Revelation, destined to prepare humanity for imminent apocalyptic
Yeah.
event.
Yeah. And that's
These are big words for this guy, man.
well, we're talking extremism, right? And that's kind of the key of what we're talking about today. Like we talk about a lot of weird stuff on this show. Some stuff we believe, some stuff we don't, but it's more of the conversation around what's out there for us to even talk about, to know what's right and what's wrong. And we leave it up to our viewers to decide what they think is right and what's wrong, or what's real and what's fake. And this is no different. But for these folks, when they met in 72, Applewhite was kind of at his lowest point, and Nettles gave him a sense of purpose. And I think just that in and of itself is one of those things where when you start to influence somebody, if you find somebody at their rock bottom and you try to influence them, it's really easy to kind of shape and mold what you want them to be, whatever that may be. Well, and I think that's an important part of this conversation overall.
Well, I mean, that's a trend when it comes to cults. I mean, I've read and watched a lot of stuff on cults over the years. One, I find them very fascinating, but that's really who they try to bring into the fold, is those who are at that
malleable.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's either you have no friends, you've lost loved ones in your life, and you feel alone, and then they prey on that, and that's how they bring you into the fold and get you to start believing in their purpose.
So these two kind of concocted a belief system that infused, and it's super weird, but they infused kind of Christian theology with extraterrestrial life. They claimed that Earth was about to be kind of recycled or wiped clean, and that the only way to survive that was to leave the planet with their guidance. Which, if we just take a pause there and think about what that just said, which is we're infusing Christian life with extraterrestrials, and the only way to survive is to leave the planet, is like, talk about extremism, and this is that.
Yeah, and really Bonnie was the real driving force behind the group's spiritual identity early on. Right now, I would say as they advanced, Applewhite probably got more involved in that, but right from the beginning, it was her ideas. I mean, she convinced Applewhite that they had a divine mission to lead people to the higher plane of existence. Now, in this scenario, it meant hopping on a spaceship eventually and leaving. But then after Nettles passed away in 1985 from cancer, Applewhite was left to lead the group on his own, which that also affected him, right? And also with the group's direction.
Yeah, and I think this is where things. So we probably kind of have a culmination of things here. We've got kind of the leader who was her, who passed, and then Applewhite, who we know was kind of not secure in his own beliefs and sexuality, and then had kind of been led down this path, and now he's in charge. And that kind of leads into what he's created as the beliefs of Heaven's Gate, because this is just where things get bizarre. And the foundation of their belief system was the idea of what they called the next level, which was essentially a form of salvation through extraterrestrial intervention. Applewhite and Nettles believed that Earth was just a stepping stone, and that human bodies were vehicles meant to be discarded once a person was ready to transcend to a higher existence. That concept is something that's interesting. And what I would like to say is, like, to me, this whole thing is bizarre and kind of crazy, and it's mind-blowing to me that people believe in it. But at the same time, I want to kind of try to pull out pieces of what I think are kind of real. And like we've heard Bob Lazar say in some of the documents that he read through, that humans were vessels for souls, as soul containers. And part of what they're talking about is kind of in that same line of being, is that your earthly body doesn't really mean a lot. It's your soul that's important, and the things that your soul stands for. So,
yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, they taught that followers needed to rid themselves of all human attachment.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, you're right there. I mean, that's leaving. To me, what that means is leaving friendships, leaving family, leaving jobs. You're basically dedicating yourself to this group, and even their physical identities. If I remember correctly, they all shaved their heads, women and men. They all wore the same clothes. Like there was like really you couldn't even differentiate male from female in some instances within this group. And then they were expected to follow strict rules and including complete celibacy and total obedience to the leadership. Now, what's really strikingly odd about this cult, and you mentioned it earlier, was the no sex part. Typically, a cult leader has multiple partners, and it's his offspring, right? Like, if you and your wife were part of this cult, he would have access to your wife and my wife and everybody else's. That's a typical cult. This one was just kind of a weird one.
So let's take a quick sidebar from this conversation real quick, just because it's relevant and in the news right now. Okay. P. Diddy got raided, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the raid, they found like 713 dildos in his mansion. And apparently he was like, he's convicted or, whatever of like all of these sex crimes, but 700 plus dildos in his mansion. Would you consider that a cult or just a good time?
Well, somebody's having a good time. I would say maybe we're over compulsive. Like what? I mean,
I don't know.
That's an arsenal in itself. Like if you would have said 700 and some guns, I'm like, all right, cool. I get it. Not 700 dildos.
Yeah. Well, and like 1,000 bottles of baby oil.
See, that's just odd shit, man.
It's fucking cult.
I hope more stuff comes out on that, and it's so weird
that might be an episode down the road. Although it's not really paranormal or UFO based. This one at least touches extraterrestrials, but P. Diddy's is.
Can you imagine being the cop that had to log all 700 dildos?
I hope he wore gloves.
Something.
Anyway,
Lysol.
Back to the topic at hand. With the group we're talking about, that discipline, that kind of what you were talking about, extended to every aspect of life. Members wore uniforms, which even became more pronounced towards the end of the existence of the cult. They dressed in unisex clothing, baggy pants, loose shirts, and the whole intent was to kind of downplay gender and sexuality, which were seen as distractions. Individualism wasn't just discouraged, it was actively suppressed. This is weird to me, but this is cult-like behavior, but they gave up personal names and adopted new, sometimes, I've heard it described as like computer-like names like Talati and Jawandi, to break with their former identities, just to become, you are part of this cult and who you were before doesn't exist.
The name changes.
What
it reminds me of? The Substitute Teacher skit. A. Ron, Jay Quellen.
Yeah.
That's what that reminded me
Get your ass down to Oshag Hennessy's office.
that right there just made me think of that immediately. Yeah. I mean, even the simplest aspects of their life were controlled, man. They had to adhere to strict daily routines that included detailed hygiene practices, which I am not opposed to. Mm-hmm. There's some people out there that really need to work on some hygiene, so I'm down with that one.
Yeah.
I could be down with that cult.
Yeah.
Yeah. A vegan diet and limited sleep. Now, the limited sleep part, that almost sounds like you're in the military at that point. I mean, I'm used to the limited sleep. Applewhite believed that these rules were necessary to cleanse themselves of earthly indulgences so they could prepare to ascend.
Yeah, one of the particularly fascinating kind of rules of this group was just their obsession with conformity. And I remember when this was on TVs, everyone was dressing alike because they were on the news a couple different times, and everyone wore black shirts and sweatpants. And I remember it was kind of that like iconic like Nike sneaker, and they had arm patches that read like Heaven's Gate away team, which to me is just like laughably hilarious, but I'm sure for whatever reason that was, whatever, but that was a way to symbolize their unity and preparing to leave the world. But to me, of all the things you could have picked of those things, it's just the whole thing is bizarre to me, but the fact that you're like, I'm going to kill myself, and yeah, I get it. You want me to wear these sweatpants and shirt and armbands? Sounds good. Like, sign me up. Like, it's just.
But do you think that they knew, like the cult members knew what the end game was? Do you really think that when they signed up for this, that they knew that there was going to be a mass suicide? Or do you just think that they're just looking for a community to join? It sounded cool, but then once they were in, they just found themselves, they were in so deep, they just couldn't get out.
And you just wonder, like, when Nettles died, like, is that a turning point in this entire group, or was she really pushing towards this too? I really don't know.
It almost sounds like, just from the research that we've done and the facts that we're providing, I think that might have been the turning point, man. I think that now granted, I think that the chick that he met, the nurse, like, she had a specific path that she was kind of leading him down, steering him down. But then when she passed, he was already dealing with so many different emotions. Like, he was on an emotional roller coaster even when he met her. I just think he went sideways, man. I don't necessarily. It's hard to say, but I don't know if she was actually like, yeah, on this date, this is what we're looking for, and we're all eating pudding with poison and shit in it.
Well, and kind of to that note, I mean, this, kind of eventually, and this is the sad part about all of this, right? Like, we talk about people's personal belief systems, and whether right or wrong, it's indifferent. You're allowed to have your own opinion. That's part of being a member of the United States. But unfortunately for this group, it all leads to their kind of tragic final act, which was tied to the Hale-Bopp comet in 1997. Applewhite had become convinced that the comet was the sign that they had been waiting for, and their final exit from Earth had arrived. But there's more to this story, and that's kind of what feeds into this podcast content.
I know we're making light of some of this shit, but this is probably the favorite part of, like, the research that we did. So there was an amateur astronomer who falsely reported that his spaceship was following the Hale-Bopp comet. All right, and when he reported that, like, it took the internet by storm. Mm-hmm. And it quickly spread and was seized upon by Applewhite as proof that the UFO was coming to take him to the next level. So, okay.
Can you imagine? Like, just pause for a second. So, like, hey guys, we need to ascend. Here is this comet. This is exactly what we've been waiting for. Like, wouldn't you just leave and just be like, you know what, dude? I'm tired of wearing the sweatpants. The armband's a little, I don't want to be part of the, quote unquote, away team. Like, what the fuck is going on? I'm out.
There was a lot of things before that would make me be like,
yeah,
deuces, right?
Yeah, man.
But anytime you're taking advice from an amateur anything, right, and it's followed by a spaceship, you should just question that.
Yeah.
And the followers should question that at that point, right? It's not like it came from, like, a leading astronomer in science that's, written X amount of peer-reviewed articles.
Yeah.
This is some dude with his fucking telescope in his mom's basement.
Who's cut his nuts off.
Not at that point. I don't think they cut him off at that point yet. But he wasn't, I don't even think this amateur astronomer was even part of this group.
No.
That's the thing that kills me.
He just found it as the sign.
Yeah.
So you just have such a whole,
This just goes to show that not everything you read on the internet's real.
Fucking A, yeah. So Applewhite convinces his followers that this was their, kind of quote unquote exit cue, that they needed to shed their human bodies and what he considered to send. They had rented a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, and began preparing for the mass suicide, which is sad. And on March 26, 1997, 39 people were found dead, neatly arranged in their bunk beds, dressed in identical black clothing, with their Nike sneakers on and purple shrouds over their bodies.
And if I remember correctly, they actually went out and like did stuff on a bucket list. Like they weren't allowed to have jobs. There was like 2 people that were allowed to have jobs. But they were confined, from the research, they were confined to their homes. They couldn't leave. But then when this comet was coming, they actually were allowed to go out and indulge themselves in, bucket list items, like whether that was going to skating rink or roller coaster, that shit,
Yeah.
before all that stuff happened.
Yeah.
But the suicide method was a chilling method. I mean, they took a lethal dose. I believe it was like arsenic or rat poisoning.
It was phenobarbital, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's too big of a word for this guy, so we'll
Yeah.
go with it. With applesauce and vodka.
Yeah.
What kind? Do you think there's a cocktail named after that? Like if you went to a bar right now.
I wouldn't drink it if it. I can tell you that.
Not, I would not.
Here's what would you call it? Would you call it the Hail Bop?
Oh, that's a good drink name. I like that.
Yeah.
But then they place plastic bags over their heads to suffocate. Now, if it's not bad enough that you just ingested poison, applesauce is the number 2, and then the vodka, which I'm down with. But then placing a plastic bag over your head, that's commitment.
Well, the whole thing is commitment, right?
But even with the poison, you still have a chance of living. There's a chance that it may not kill you.
Right.
But the plastic bag over the head is just saying, no, you're dead. You're dying.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like the level of commitment, that's a whole new level of commitment there.
Yeah.
You really had a chance before. Now you just basically, yeah. And it was done in waves. Some members died while others prepared the bodies of the fellow cult members, carefully covering their faces with purple cloths. So think about that.
Can you imagine being the last one?
I guarantee they were questioning themselves.
I'd have been like, you know what, this is cool, but I'm gonna deuces out of here, and I'll call the police for you guys.
I would have volunteered for wave 3.
Did you guys leave any vodka? I mean, I know you mixed it with applesauce and the phenobarbital, but if you left any, I might just take that and peace out and call it good.
Dude, I would have, if they were taking volunteers, now my luck, they would have like picked straws out of a hat or whatever.
Wave 1, number 1. Mike, let's see how this works.
Yes, like son of a bitch.
So the other weird, and it's so weird. The whole thing of this is just kind of bizarre to talk about, but it makes for interesting conversation. Each member of the cult that died, and this is a part that I just find bizarre and I don't understand it, and I would love to know more information on this. But they had a $5 bill and 3 quarters in their pockets, which a lot of people believe to symbolize kind of their, like what they needed for whatever their interstellar journey is. And, you used to hear of people dying and you would put pennies over their eyes to pay the fare or cross the river. But $5.75 in your pocket is just...
Admission on the spaceship ain't free, bitch. You got to pay up.
Yeah. And the thing of it is like Applewhite, who was the leader of this, same scenario. He was in the same boat, but like, here guys, put $5.75. Not like 2 quarters, 2 pennies, $5.75.
You would have thought being the leader, he would have gotten them for free.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can see everybody else be in charge of the mission because they're just,
I don't get it. I get the pain, the feed of the afterlife. That's a common theme that we've heard throughout religious history through time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Put the pennies over the eyes or whatever, but $5.75 in your pocket. It's not on your eyes. It's not in your hands. It's just on your person.
Yeah. I mean, and then like their bodies made headlines around the world, right? I mean,
rightfully so.
It's bizarre, right?
Yeah.
And then Heaven's Gate became infamous overnight. The media was fixated on the bizarre details and everything from the Nike shoes to the UFO cult angle. So, I mean, everything about this is just fascinating in itself. And I don't know if they were raided or if they were being looked at by law enforcement, and maybe that kind of, accelerated
the timeline,
but it just seems odd, man. Like I pray there's not a day where I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, you know what, cult sounds amazing.
I assume, and listen, like nobody understands anybody else's mental struggles. Like, you know what I mean? Like mental health has been at the forefront of this country for,
absolutely,
as of recent for a long time, and rightfully so. Like you have no idea what people are going through, mentally and whatever the struggle is. So I get the need for uniformity, the need to feel fit in with something. And I think that's where this cult piece really comes into play and makes it so interesting for somebody that feels out of place.
Right.
But for heaven's gate, what's weird to me, two of the people that didn't participate in this suicide still maintain their website, and it still exists today. And and it attracts a bunch of attention, rightfully so, from, cultists to UFO enthusiasts.
But again, like the two people are still maintaining their site. They've witnessed everything that transpired.
Yeah, what are you doing?
But yet they're still, are they profiting? Are they making money from this? Is this a money grab?
So this is where I think it gets interesting. And you and I talk all the time about this, like with Travis Walton, and where does the monetary piece come into play with this? And you're probably right. Like, this was worldwide news. So if you're going to maintain a website and you get clicks for advertisements or anything else, like, it's probably profitable for you to maintain the website, whether you believe in whatever, the cultist traditions it are or not.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things about this cult too, I mean, it became a symbol for the dangerous blend, of charismatic leaders and apocalyptic prophecy and allure to UFOs. Now, the one thing that I do like about that, I'm glad that did not happen, is that people who do believe in UFOs or extraterrestrial or whatever are not being put into this bucket of Heaven's Gate, that everyone who believes in this certain thing are now part of a cult. I am glad that never happened, at least in what I've know of the UFO community. But there's like documentaries, there's TV shows, and there's even conspiracy theories today based off the show, or off this event.
And we've already talked about their dress code, but it's worth kind of digging into the rules and standards that Applewhite imposed on his followers, especially when it came to controlling every aspect of their lives. Heaven's Gate wasn't just a belief system. It was a total lifestyle that left no room for personal freedom or dissent.
But I mean,
which is what you expect a cult, in my mind at least, what you expect a cult to be. Like,
oh yeah,
it's here are the brackets for you to work within, and you are going to follow them wholeheartedly, no questions asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether that's based off your sex or gender or whatever. Like, right. There in most cults, if you watch, there are specific jobs. There's specific rules, right? Typically in a cult, if you're a female, you're used for, sex, childbirth, cooking, and cleaning, and then the men are the ones that are going out and doing the everyday work. Right. This one doesn't appear to be that case. I mean, it almost sounds like everyone is pretty much equal.
Yeah.
I mean, so that
was like complete uniformity, which is what they were pushing.
Yeah. I mean, they live commonly and followed a very strict set of guidelines. One of the most significant aspects of the group's obsession was with uniformity. Like you just said, everything from their thoughts to their appearance was regulated. Now, the thoughts part, I mean, everybody has their own thoughts. Like, I don't know what you're thinking right now. So I'm sure that...
I'm thinking this Guinness tastes delicious, because it does.
Does it?
I'm not a big Guinness fan, but today it tastes good.
I'm not a big Guinness guy either.
It just tastes okay normally, but it's Oktoberfest and it's darker, so we'll give it a pass.
Yeah. I mean, but Applewhite preached that individuality was a form of human corruption, something that needed to be eradicated to reach the next level. And yes and no. I mean, I can see where individuality, I think it's a good thing, individuality. To me, if everybody was the same, it would just be so bland and boring. But I think that's what he wanted.
That's exactly what he wanted. And to achieve that, they had strict regulations on diet, personal hygiene, and even the way that they spoke. Conversations were encouraged to be emotionless and devoid of humor. They believed that humor and strong emotions were a distraction that could lead them off their spiritual path.
Boy, they don't want to hang out with us.
Yeah, individuality. I mean, if you're trying to get two dudes drinking beer in a garage to join a cult, you're probably at an uphill battle right out of the gates, let alone anything else.
But yes and no. But we would entertain it just because we're fascinated by whatever. So we'll sit here and listen to.
That's fair. Yeah. Let me go to the ranch. Let me see what this shit's all about. But I'm probably going to bail at like 2:00 in the morning out the back door, and I'm going to take all your vodka with me.
Yeah, I'm out.
Yeah.
I won't give you my example. What I said I'd be out earlier, but I'd be out. I mean, they even had a system of reporting accountability where members would report on each other, like fucking tattletales. Well, we're in grammar school now. If they felt someone was deviating from the rules or showing signs of individuality. So to me, all that breeds is content, right? Like, or not content, but just, I hate you now. Mm-hmm. It's divisive, right? So now you're telling on me because I looked at something I shouldn't have looked at, or, maybe I was having thoughts of something and I wanted to just talk to you about it because I felt like you and I were close. And then you run back to the leader and tell them that I'm thinking differently than
Yeah.
So it's definitely control. So that part right there would just make me want to lose my mind.
Yeah. In the other big one, and we've kind of talked about it, and obviously it comes into play, but their major rule was celibacy.
I couldn't do it.
Well, Applewhite believed that sexual desire was one of the most significant obstacles to achieving, spiritual enlightenment needed for ascension in his mind. And this is where we were talking about earlier. He was so committed that he himself and several other members underwent voluntary castration. And it was seen as a form of dedication and a way to purify their bodies from sexual urges.
Sorry, ain't happening.
I just if you have this belief system, it's so weird. Like, the human body is what it is. So if you go to the extent to castrate yourself, you're, undoing what's naturally done. So if in your mind it's all about the spirit, then I guess your physical body doesn't really matter. So go ahead, whack them off, and we'll ascend. I don't know. The whole thing is just, I would be fascinated to hear a conversation that he had with those folks, telling them why this was important. And I get the idea of, like, the philosophical idea is we don't want sexuality to be an issue, so we're going to castrate you. But, like, people do it to pets all the time, right? Like,
I get that.
I get it. You want them to fall in line and be behavioral. So you're just taking it to that, like, next level. But I would have loved to hear the conversation of, like, what words are you using to convince these people that this makes sense?
Well, you also do it to your dog too, because you don't want them going over and humping the neighbor's dog. Next thing you know, you have 12 puppies running around.
Right.
So, I mean, there is.
But don't you want more followers?
I do not. I have one.
I mean, if you're the cult, don't you want to expand your footprint? Or maybe that's too much inbreeding. Anyway, sidebar. I don't know. It's just bizarre to me.
That got weird.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, it was a control thing, and I think that when he was asking them to castrate themselves, it was reprogramming their entire identities. Because if you think of women who have, breast cancer, right? And they have to go through a procedure to have one of their breasts removed, which is horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it messes with them mentally, right? Because that's part of what makes them a woman.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not the only thing, obviously, but it's one of the
part of your identity.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So I can't imagine. I mean, talk about just complete control of just. I mean, that's a lot of power for one person if you think about it. Like, regardless of, like, how much money somebody has, when you can get somebody to go to an extreme like that, like, you own them. You own everything about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the tragic part about all this. Obviously, the ending was tragic, but just because then you get to a point where you just forget who you even were beforehand. I mean, you could have been a very interesting, fun person, and then you have one individual who just completely crushes all that.
And I think it brings up kind of an interesting intersection. And to your point, like, how did Applewhite manage to hold such intense psychological control over these people? And a lot of cult leaders, and we've seen this across the board, and it's not just Heaven's Gate, but it's others. But it's like isolation, indoctrination, manipulation. But Heaven's Gate took it to an extreme. But those kind of three methods are what a lot of people use to kind of force people in line.
Yeah, I mean they isolated themselves from the rest of the world. They isolated themselves from their limited contact with family. So my understanding, they could have some contact, but really their family, outside world was completely cut off from them. And the group lived together. They ate together. They worked together, which made Heaven's Gate the entirety of their reality, right? So if you can't leave somewhere and you're just constantly there, and that's what you're doing day in and day out, I mean, it's a complete mind fuck.
Yeah, and the way that he positioned himself as kind of their like holy figure, right? He wasn't just a leader. He was he was the only person that could guide them to salvation. It was him or the highway. He called himself Dew, which is weird. And his followers truly believed that he was an alien representative, going kind of to our podcast topic, from the next level. And when you combine that isolation with a belief, from an infallible leader, it's easy to see how the group became kind of misled and so insulated into this is the only way that we can move forward.
Yeah, and I mean, there's an idea of gradual indoctrination. New members were brought in slowly and had to adhere to the group's increasingly bizarre rules over time. So it's one of those like I'm going to give you a piece of candy now, and then next time I'll give you a couple more pieces of candy before we're going to give you the full dish, right?
Right.
By the time they were fully immersed, they had given up all their personal autonomy.
Yep.
Right. And the psychological manipulation was subtle but incredibly effective.
Yeah.
So they were being controlled without even knowing they were being controlled at that moment. Mm-hmm. And then turning otherwise rational people into devoted believers willing to end their life for this cause.
Yeah. Yeah. And because they believe so completely in the next level, which was kind of their shtick, and the impending destruction of Earth, it ended up being a fear-based system. They were too afraid of being left behind. And that's kind of that piece of like, this whole thing is manipulative. But that piece of like, to me, in the end, it's like, you want to do this, I have to do this, and then the fear becomes of, I have no choice but to do this. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, like if you're thinking in terms of like a funnel, that's the only point that you can end at. And I think that's the piece where you don't want to be somebody that's going to be left behind. What if what he's saying is really true and I don't want to be left behind? And I don't want to, be so spiritually impure that I'm not able to ascend. And that kind of fear drove the control over that group.
Or what if the part of taking your life wasn't so much because you believed in the cause, but you just wanted out, and that was the only way you could get out, was just to commit suicide, not because you believed in the cause, but there was no other. You felt there was no other way for you to leave this group.
Yeah, and I think that's the sad part about this, right?
That's very sad. That's a sad way to think about it. But I mean, there very well could have been members who were just in so deep, they did not have a way out because maybe there was threats. I don't know. Maybe if they felt if they left, that they would seek them out and maybe do them harm. And their only way to rid themselves from this guy or this cult was just to volunteer to take your own life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just a fucking horrible thought.
Yeah.
Damn. Whew, that was intense there for a second, thinking about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, because that's just, God, man, it's so tragic.
Well, it just goes to show the dangers in extreme belief, right? Like, we examine a lot of different things in this podcast, but like you and I, to the two dudes drinking beer in a garage. We find this stuff interesting, but it's not like I go well outside of my means to make sure that I understand what's going on in all these different facets. I have my own belief system, and whether right or wrong, it is what it is, but I'm not an extremist in any manner. So these folks are so cordoned off, and that's just what makes it so sad, right? Like, if you have extreme belief, and especially today with technology, like who can manipulate, your social media algorithm can push you towards something. So where you already believe extremely in something, you might have an even more extreme belief, because if you wake up in the morning, you go through social media and the algorithm is pushing whatever that information is at you, then it's always at the front of your mind, and it makes for a much more intense scenario. So if you're somebody that's a little bit mentally unstable, maybe you're insecure about your sexuality or religious beliefs or whatever, this offers an avenue to get out. But if that avenue to get out is actually an avenue to get dead, it really poses a real problem, for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean this whole scenario just had a significant impact on the culture since the tragic end in 1997. There's been tons of interest in cults since then. I mean, we're sitting here talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the way that they attract followers and the psychology behind them. And I encourage all of you to watch some documentaries that's out there on cults, because there are psychiatrists, psychologists that talk about some of the things that we've already talked about, on how they basically handpick members to be part of their cult.
Yeah.
Because not everybody that shows up saying, "Hey, I'd like to be a member," are let into the fold. I mean, because again, if you're a strong-minded person, or you're strong in your beliefs that maybe they don't believe in, they know that you're not gonna work, and they just cut you loose. But Heaven's Gate stands out because it combined apocalyptic beliefs with UFO mythology in a way that captured the public's attention or public's imagination.
Yeah, and listen, we talk extensively about technology in the show, whether it's Bob Lazar and Element 115 or different elements of different things. But the one real world thing, and that nobody can debate, is that Heaven's Gate was one of the first kind of cults and groups to use the internet as a recruiting tool. Even to the extent where their website's still up.
Yeah, it's so bizarre that it hasn't been shut down.
Yeah, and when we're in a world, again, of social algorithms, maybe you're looking up, and maybe you're somebody that's into, mysticism or whatever, and you look something up and you read about Heaven's Gate and you're like, oh, this is interesting. It can really send you down an alley that's, not a good place. So I think that's where parental controls and guidance are so important, because everyone's left to their own free will and decisions. And sometimes the human mind can do really dirty things, even to itself. And sometimes you just have to take a second and have a conversation. Again, mental health is really important. If you have a question, reach out to somebody. It's not a big deal. Don't internalize it and just assume that what you're reading or, what you're exposed to is the whole sole truth.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting to see how they've been referenced in pop culture. The documentaries, TV shows, and even conspiracy theories continue to use Heaven's Gate as an example of how people can fall into dangerous belief systems. And it's a reminder of how vulnerable people can be when they're struggling to find purpose.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. The lasting fascination with Heaven's Gate shows that we still have a lot to learn, about the psychology of cults and how charismatic leaders can manipulate people into doing the unthinkable.
And I can feel the purpose thing, man. When I left the military, I was searching for purpose. Now I wasn't obviously to this extreme, but I mean, I was seeking other people to talk to try to figure out what is my purpose. So I can get where someone can go down that rabbit hole and just be on the struggle bus with it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on Heaven's Gate?
I think it's, to me, in totality, this is sad. And this is where I struggle with this podcast and what we do, in general, because there's some people that get so fixated on a belief that they leave their life, you leave your family and your friends to focus solely on the one thing. And for humanity, I feel like in some regards, like we applaud it. Like when you talk about an Olympian, all they do for the entirety of the year is train for the Olympics. That is their sole dedication. But we look at that as a good purpose, right? And that's how it's, facilitated in the media. Versus if you're somebody struggling with a mental health illness or sexuality or whatever, and you try to go find somebody that has a common belief system, and you run into one of these leaders that want to manipulate you into whatever their ideology is, I think that's a really dangerous slope. And like, we spend a lot of time talking about fun and interesting and fascinating subjects, but I think this is one of those ones where it's like, and we're talking about it because it involves extraterrestrials, right? Like the UFO behind Halley's Comet. But I think this is one of those things that's like really dangerous to, impressionable youth. And in general, I think it's sad. I don't know that you can't ever control it because of freedom of speech in the United States. But like at the same time, for people that are struggling mentally, like you just can't internalize. You got to have conversations with other people and kind of come to a group consensus and not just be solely manipulated by a singular person.
Yeah, I mean, this is a prime example of a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind faith, right? Like you're going into something and you're putting so much faith behind what somebody's saying or what they're doing, because they're only going to give you the highlights, right? If I want you to join something, it's just like going to a place of employment. Well, I'll use the Marine Corps because it's a fucking cult. It was a great call, but it was a cult. They get in there, the way they get you in there is because they give you all these grand things that you get to do, or the awesome things you're going to get to do, right? And then when you get in there, you got to embrace the suck, right? Because when you go through boot camp, it's the same thing. Everybody looks alike. Nobody has a name, right? So it's kind of like this in some ways. You're taught how to think, right? So in a way, it is actually a cult. Damn it, Brian, I joined a cult.
Good for you.
I mean, it paid off. I mean, I got out of it.
I feel like it worked out all right.
It worked out okay. But damn, that is kind of a cult.
Yeah,
I love it. But no, it was just saying, it just gives an example of following someone blindly to that point. And I despise it because I just see these people preying on people who are at their maybe at their lowest point in their life, right? Where they really
who just don't know any better. Your thoughts are kind of malleable.
Yeah, it's just they are seeking help, and all you're doing is fucking them over.
Yeah,
because of whatever ideology that you have.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the part that. So when it comes to like cults, like they're upsetting to me, just because like my whole thing is if it sounds too good to be true, and your gut's telling you that something's off, heel toe express, turn around, leave.
I think what's hard about this subject too is like, how would you define a cult? Like at what point of a group would you say you're in a cult? Like, for example, I'm a member of the Moose Lodge. Would you consider that a cult?
That's for old people. So
they have cheap beers, to be fair, and that's the only reason I'm involved. Yeah. But I did have to wear a moose hat or something else to get in there.
But that was that was just to become a member. Like, it's not like every night you have to be there and you're in there swearing an oath to a giant moose and you're doing whatever, right? Sure. That's just a club. It's a place where, you can.
What I'm asking is so that's a great reference. So how do you differentiate a club from a cult?
Well, typically a cult, you are housed there, you're stuck there, you have to fall in line to their belief systems, etc. A club would just be, the Moose Club or the Eagles or the Elks or whatever.
So would you say the ability to come and go is what differentiates a club from a cult?
You have the ability to choose. You have personal
I think that's
choice.
Important. Yeah.
Personal choice. Right. If you want to attend a meeting with them, you can attend a meeting. If you don't want to, you don't have to. You can pay your monthly dues.
If you don't want to cut your balls off, you don't have to.
They would never ask you to do that.
Yeah.
If they did, you would not be a member.
Probably would not be a member.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's my thing about a cult. And that's what's upsetting to me when it comes to cults is just how they prey on individuals who are just potentially at their lowest point or just needing something, to your point, purpose. And they just suck them in and then they just completely derail them and ruin their lives forever.
What do you think this does? And, and the reason that we chose this cult of all cults for Heaven's Gate is that their fascination, affiliation, whatever you want to call it, with Hale Bop, and that the alleged, UFO spacecraft was following it. Like, you and I talk a lot about kind of like the fun that's poked within the UFO world about what may or may not be going on. And kind of, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how this falls within that. Does this help promote that, or does this detract from that?
For the promotion of like believing in UFO and extraterrestrial stuff?
I think for making it legit.
I don't think it helped nor hurt. I mean, I don't think it hurt the UFO community, because I think when people see this is an extreme case, right? I don't think people sat out there and like, oh, well, since you believe in UFOs, you're now part of a cult. I don't think that had a negative effect on it. Now, the leaving on a mothership, that was like kind of like a joke growing up of people who believe like, oh, you're getting ready to leave on the mothership, that type thing. But I don't think it had a negative impact on the UFO community. I think it had a negative impact because of people who believe in UFOs may feel like they would then have some type of negative towards them, I guess, from general public, but I don't know. That's a tricky one.
My feeling is that this is a general negative towards it. And the reason that I say that is not because of the cult themselves, but I think when we talk about the idea of disclosure, right? And if the things that Fravor, Graves, Elizondo, and Grush are talking about are real, this shows what do I want to say? Like, public people that are maybe moldable to ideas may just go into pure panic. So like, if you are, and I don't want to say gullible, that's not the right term, but whatever you want to call it, if you're willing to believe that what someone is saying is true, and you go to the extent of saying like, if disclosure happens and we're saying that UFOs, aliens are real, whether they're outside or inside this world, whatever the case may be, like, I think it just shows that humanity is not ready for disclosure, and that if disclosure happens, that we just incite chaos. So in my mind, when I'm thinking about like, if the government knows all these things, why wouldn't you just tell everybody? And something like this makes me think like, this is one of the reasons why it wouldn't come out, because you just create mass chaos. Maybe not for everybody, but for a percentage of the population enough that like, are you going to create a Mad Max environment where everybody weapons up and you buy your MRE rations and sit in your basement and, with your tinfoil hat and listen to the radio? Like, that's the piece for me. Like, in addition to obviously the tragedy of the people that are, who are emotionally susceptible to this, like from a disclosure standpoint for extraterrestrial contact, I think this is overall a negative because it sends a negative message.
No, I agree with that. I do believe it sends a negative message, and those are some very valid points. I just don't think that it had. So this is where I say it's tricky, and it's hard for me to like articulate what I'm thinking here, because yes, it's negative in a way because people lost their lives due to this belief that this guy made up, right? Yeah. But I don't think it's a negative to everyone that's in the UFO community or who believes in UFOs or UAPs or extraterrestrial. I don't believe it's a negative towards them at all.
What about the people that don't think about it one way or the other? I think that's where this question comes into being. And I don't know the answer, but like, what's your guess of the percentage of the American population that doesn't think one way or the other about UFOs? Like, I don't disbelieve. It's just not a part of my everyday thought.
I'd say probably 80%, 90% of people. I don't think they really think about any of that.
A large majority. So if you come at them with disclosure, I think the easy thing to go is say, what are the big news topics related to this?
I think there's more people that believe the Easter Bunny is real than UFOs. And I'm being serious with that.
Wow. All right. For our viewers out there, we need some commentary. Do you believe in UFOs or the Easter Bunny? Which one way or the other?
If you're asking that question, I think that there's probably more people that believe in the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus than they would UFOs. Yeah. And I think because there's that negative towards UFOs, regardless of this, there's always going to be the negative, right? Like, oh, there's no way that there's any life outside of Earth, which I think is just very closed-minded thinking. Mm-hmm. And this is coming from a non-believer, right? The tweener shirt. You love my shirts.
I do. No sign of intelligent life anywhere.
Yeah.
It's an alien with a binocular standing in front of a house.
Yeah. So I've been wearing some pretty funny shirts.
Yeah. Solid
shirts. For the betweener guy, I've been wearing some.
All I wear is music shirts, except for today. I just randomly have an October.
I mean, the music shirts are legit. I'm not wearing these to make fun of anything. I just I get a new shirt, dude, and it brings me joy.
I appreciate that. I heart Hot Aliens too.
I love that shirt. Yeah. I can't wait to wear it again.
Probe away.
I'm trying not to wear them too often. I'm trying to have a different shirt for every episode.
I like it.
Yeah. But anyway, so now I lost track.
Well, anyway, the point being is, if it comes to disclosure, I don't know whether this phrase thing, one way or the other. I just think that personally, I don't like negative attention brought to a subject that we don't understand, because I think it just invites criticism. And I think the more we invite criticism, the less that people will take any real research that's done seriously. And I am enough of a believer to think that there's enough going on that if you apply excess criticism, you're just going to automatically create non-belief.
And I think that, well, just like we discussed in last week's episode, maybe that's what the government wants. That's why they don't release anything. Right. They want, public discourse. They don't want there to be trust within the UFO world, because if they do that, then you'll have more believers, and then they'll feel pressure to where they actually might have to release something. So I think I think propaganda has been going on for
forever. Yeah, I agree with you.
So, all right, we're ready to wrap her up.
Wrap it up.
All right. Well, please like and share this video. Hit the little bell up in the corner. That will let you know when we release new content. You can find us on Instagram, Otherworldly Encounter Podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Otherworldly Encounters, and you can send us your personal stories at otherworldlyencounters2024@gmail.com.
Like, subscribe, give us your stories, give us your beer recommendations. We want your band recommendations. We want your stories. We want your feedback, good, negative, or in between. We just want to hear from you. We're here for ourselves because we enjoy talking about it, but we enjoy hearing what other people think, feel, because it helps add to the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yep. So until the next time, keep your mind open, your eyes on the sky. You never know what's going to fly by.
And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.